welcome to this Monday edition of The Chiefs. With us tonight are, of course, Robbie Rampay of One News from Reliance in Mandaluyong. And also joining us is former National Defense Secretary Orly Mercado, former Senator Orly Mercado, who now serves as a member of the NAPOLCOM, or National Police Commission Committee on Crime Prevention and Criminal Justice. Senator Orly, thank you for joining us.
Good evening. Robbie.
And Robbie.
Magandang gabi po.
Sen, should I call you Senator or Secretary?
Orly.
Orly lang. Sige. Well, sir, you are with the NAPOLCOM Committee on Crime Prevention and Criminal Justice. Is this an advisory board?
Yeah, ano to ba? Alam mo naman ang militar at saka ang police, meron silang, they have advisory boards, multisectoral. And I represent, and I'm one of the civilian personalities who was invited to be in the Technical Committee on Crime Prevention and Criminal Justice. You know, a lot of the police officers and military officers also have training with the Development Academy of the Philippines, where I am, well, they call me...
Eminent professor.
Eminent fellow. Academic council. So I'm out of activities and go through a lot of studies and papers, etc., thesis. So they invited me to sit in into this advisory board. Sabi ko, okay naman, you know, kami mga matatanda na, meron na lang kami.
Yes, sir. Well, we asked that kasi just to contextualize your position, kasi we do want to get down to how this happened, what processes were involved, and what mechanisms failed or worked. But in this case, siguro failed dun sa police procedural system. So, Senator, if you don't mind, can I ask you straight out na po? Kasi we were looking at the records of itong si Staff Sergeant Huesca, the guy who shot these two civilians, and it was a very colorful record. We were looking at two homicide cases, admin cases nga lang, that were dismissed, but as well at least 3 or 4 cases of grave misconduct and grave neglect of duty in the last 10 years. So apparently, marami siyang kaso, some dropped and some were punished. Weren't these already clear signs that there was something wrong with this policeman, and yet he still continued in the police force?
Yeah, I think that's a clear sign. Actually, the last law that I was able to pass, it seems like another life already, in 1998, before I became secretary, was the Pmp Reform Act. One of the most important provisions there, which is actually an innovation, it's not new. It's actually, we copied it from the experience of New York Police Department. And this is the Internal Affairs Service, IAS.
Yes.
This is the police within the police. And they are supposed to watch over what happens, etc. They conduct hearings and investigations on abuse of power, corruption, involvement in crimes, etc. And they have a separate, they're supposed to have a separate career path. And they are part of the police, but then again, they are independent and they have their own autonomy. I feel that they have not really implemented it to the fullest, in the sense that it should have been given power, supported, given and then you can have data. Yung sinasabi mo, Ed, napaka-importante yun eh. You have, the first thing that you should do, as I've been saying, is you have to track the problem. You have to map police violence. And that means you should have data. And that data should be available for studies. If you find out there are people who are, persistently encountering problems, etc., then that would be the basis of your intervention.
Parang habitual offenders.
Yes.
But Senator, if I may ask, with NAPOLCOM precisely, does this data exist or not? That's one of the things that people want to understand. I mean, we're talking about, for example, the individual case of Huesca and so on. it's very easy to finally get his background and so on. But every time we talk about these systemic problems, including the cultural problems of impunity in the police, we ask the police, meron bang data? Ilan bang nahatulan? Ilan bang na-file na administrative case? And so on. We're always told, well, we'll get back to you. Hindi namin alam. Being in NAPOLCOM now, having some access to that.
Actually, my work is just voluntary.
Okay. But as far as you understand, okay.
I'm not part of the structure of NAPOLCOM. I am just part of a committee giving advice, and I'm giving my advice.
Okay, that's understood. That's understood. Okay, my apologies. Thank you for clarifying that. But I guess our point is, as former senator, as former defense chief for that matter, and now in this advisory role, you have greater understanding of the workings better than most people. As far as you understand, that data that you said is so important. Does it exist? Can we get access to that? And how professionally and meticulously is it being handled?
I doubt very much if there is real data. Kaya nga sabi ko nga meron namang internal affairs service. And that is part of the job, to be able to track. And you cannot track without, you cannot manage what you cannot measure. Alam naman natin yun, sabi ni Peter Drucker. Kung wala kang data, wala kang history, wala kang you act according to the news headlines and to the news stories of the day. And afterward, there is no sense of history. Walang, how can you analyze the problem how can you have data analytics without data? You know.
So to that point, is there periodic assessment or clinical reevaluation of policemen every year, every 2 years, or thereabouts? In other words, of course, we're talking about data and the lack of it, but is there also a mechanism for policemen to be reevaluated every so often?
Hindi ko alam. Actually, I'm interested to ask them the same question.
So, for example, clinical evaluation.
Actually, yun ang importante. Kinakailangan mayroong mga records. Then, the other thing that you should have is a chance to be able to study very carefully the issue of militarization of the police. And I constantly tell my students and those, iba ang role ng police at saka ng militar. The police actually, when you come to think of it, you read very carefully the Constitution. What does it say? Establish a national police force. National scope, civilian in character. But look at the police today. Do you see it as do you see a civilian character? Even the structure is military. So the point there is that there is a difference, and the difference is very clear. The police service is service-oriented. The police organization is service-oriented, while the military is mission-oriented. We don't want to see the military parking their tanks and their armored personnel vehicles in the streets, etc. Only it signals a serious military problem intervention, which very strong political problem. Pero yung police dapat nakalubog sa yan. Ano ba ang sagot sa problema ng krimen? Police visibility at kinakailangan lubog sa komunidad. Yung police, they have to be immersed in the community.
Okay, sir. Let me just bring in. We have also as our guest joining us tonight is Commission on Human Rights Commissioner Karen Dumpit. Good evening, Commissioner.
Hi, ma'am. Good evening.
Good evening. Can you hear us? Naka-mute pa po yata kayo.
Sorry, good evening.
Hi, good evening. Now, ma'am, obviously you're here and we're discussing this because this is the last thing we need in 2020. This is the kind of story that also reminds people now, my God, 2020 is not yet over. But this very tragic story in Paniki, Tarlac. this policeman has gotten us talking about, I mean, beyond this one incident, this matter that a lot of people have zeroed in on, impunity. And we were talking about earlier with former Senator Orly Mercado about, let's have a big picture here, because one of the immediate things that the police are saying and Malacanang is saying is isolated yan, bugok yan, talagang and unfortunately, and totoo naman, di natin linalahat, no? Di natin linalahat. But question to the CHR, as you monitor cases like this, how prevalent is this? Do we have an idea, for example, of how many policemen and how many cases are brought forward to the attention of the CHR on matters like this?
Well, I don't have the figures on hand right now, no. But just to show you that there is really a culture of killings in the country right now. Take a look at the campaign against illegal drugs. This killing is not really different from the killings that have been conducted against drug addicts, for instance. No, a killing is simply a killing, so it has to be condemned. Every killing has to be condemned. And we were even discussing this in the office earlier. No, it's really the culture prevailing in our country right now that actually incentivizes attacks, violent attacks. Kahit sabihin natin that they are drug addicts, for instance, or they are criminals, they have to go through the rule of law. And this is something that we have said earlier on, and we are saying it right now, that we have to take a step back and take a look at what actions have contributed to this kind of behavior from our law enforcement agencies. Is it really the culture? Is it really the training? Is it really recruitment? Or what you were saying earlier on, is there a periodic review of psychological evaluation of these law enforcement?
Let me cut to the chase on that, because that was a question that Ed was raising earlier. Do you know the answer to that? I mean, with regards, for example, to a periodic review and the soundness of our police officers, for example, to even carry a weapon.
No, we've raised that issue before and we haven't received a definite answer. So I think that's one of the challenges and one of the questions that the Philippine National Police as an institution should be able to answer, including the fact that there were many cases prior to that. There was reference to the Internal Affairs Service of the Philippine National Police, and we have already said this in the past. They are not independent. How can they investigate their own? And even if the Internal Affairs Service will recommend the suspension or the dismissal of a police officer based on our review, if the regional director does not agree, or even if the higher authorities do not agree, it's not carried out. So my main question to that is really these cases, specifically those that were more recent. No, there were 2 cases that were more recent, and the Internal Affairs Service said that there was no substantial evidence. My question to that is that, what is that? There has to be, beyond condemnation, there has to really be a reflection on how it came to be this way, how this police officer has gotten away with it with so many cases already, at least 5, I think, or 4. For reflection, let us reflect and let us re-evaluate all these cases, trace it, paano sila nakaalpas, paano nakaalpas si Nuesca dito, no? And
how did it slip through the cracks, diba? Parang after 4 or 5 cases, including 2 homicide na admin, although na-clear siya doon, pero he was punished for several serious offenses in the past. So that makes you ask a question nga po na where is the mechanism here to make sure that repeat offenders do not get armed and deployed?
And yes, and that internal mechanism is clearly not working, as you said, no? I'm more interested in that. Let's use this as a test case, trace back why all the mechanisms have failed. At least pag makikita mo sa court case, may rigor doon ng konti kasi there's independence there. But the internal mechanisms are not really working. And again, I will go back to the campaign against criminality. And this has not happened, this is not really an isolated case as we see it, because there are many, many cases that are still pending in the Internal Affairs Service that we have not heard of. What's the feedback in terms of the cases of police brutality, and even the cases where you find deaths following a police operation. So yung use ng lethal force is something that they have to reflect upon, and there must be changes in policy on this. Changes in practice, changes in policy, and take a look at the culture also of whether this really creates an enabling environment for police officers to be so brazen as to carrying guns and being able to, just shoot just like that. It's really sensitive.
Or Lee, other than having been aware of the provenance of the law that created the IAS, the Internal Affairs, part of the job of Congress as well is oversight on the laws that you create. Was there occasion to have oversight on the Internal Affairs system, and were these problems being mentioned now by Commissioner Dumpit? Is this old hat as well?
Palagay ko napakalaki ng pagkukulang. Meron kang batas, pero pag hindi, alam mo naman sa bansa natin yun ang problema we think we solve the problem by passing a law, but the implementation is actually very bad. You have to address a serious problem of men in uniform with a gun, a police power and a badge, and thinking that he is above the law, and that is reinforced by the fact that they can get away with it. Commissioner Dumpit is correct. You have to address the culture. If you study the other the police departments all over the world, what they have developed already in the mechanism, even in the internal affairs, is the duty of the fellow officers to intervene. They are mandated, they are required to report and intervene in case there is an abuse of power. And they have to report the attempt or the use of force, the fire
and failing which they should be accountable as well.
Yes, when you fire a pistol, you have to report. You have to explain the circumstances, and it's determined whether you fired it as a warning, etc. You announce your presence. For example, napakarami yan You are required to de-escalate before you use force. And the force that is used is defined. Now they are already looking back and studying very carefully chokeholds and strangleholds because of what happened to George Floyd in Minneapolis, which has been the cause celebre for the blacks because of this police brutality. And you are required verbal warnings before using deadly force.
Yes.
So actually, napakarami yan You're prohibited from shooting at moving vehicles now because you're liable to hit other people unless you are in real danger. So
Commissioner Dumpit, obviously, Filipino people will not run out of incidents and cases and examples of the things that Senator Orly is talking about. But I just want to go back to what you said. On the ground, once the IAS mechanisms supposedly kick in, what are the real world problems? What are the real where do the mechanisms fail? You mentioned needing the nod of the regional officers and so on. Where else? Saan pa unang napapatid ang ating self-policing and internal affairs mechanisms?
Siguro pwede nating tingnan din yung recruitment policies natin, I think that's one of the things that we ought to take a look at. In fact, many years ago, I think this was even during the time of then Secretary Orly Mercado, no? Yung PNP Human Rights Affairs Office, tinitingnan yan eh. Tinitingnan yung mga where yung frequency ng paglabag sa batas ng mismong police officers, no? And most of the time, yung frequency nun, mas talamak siya dun sa lower ranking police officers. So I were having this conversation with the PNP Human Rights Office at that time, and I was saying maybe you can take a look at the policies, recruitment policies. Also, maybe you can take a look at the kind of training that they're having, because the Senator Orly was saying earlier on, no, it's also in terms of training, no? And what he was referring to earlier is really yung application of the basic principles on the use of force rather, and firearms. That is really part of a UN General Assembly resolution. No? It actually takes a look at how you graduate from trying to suppress violence, for instance, as a peace officer. Titingnan doon yung the fact that the use of force is actually, or lethal force, the use of lethal force should actually be a last option. After you have done alternative means or to be able to ensure that there is peaceful settlement of conflict, there is also a call to understand crowd behavior or civilian behavior. Kasi ang police, dapat yan, mahaba ang PC niyan, kaya nga meron tayong tinatawag din na maximum tolerance, hindi ba? And they're not the ones that should not lose patience. Sila nga dapat yung pinakamahaba ang pasensya. But in this case, and it's good that there was a video that was taken, because we are able to see the kind of behavior that this police officer actually exhibited that led to the brutal killing and execution style of two individuals. And to think he was responding, no, marami ding nagsasabi nito, but he was off duty and it wasn't in the line of duty, etc. But you don't shed your personality or your profession when you sleep or when you go to your hometown. You're still a police officer. So yun ang sinasabi din natin dito, no? It's really the bearing, it's the character, and you must be able to find out how you can recruit police officers who can keep the peace and not be the one violating it.
Well, Commissioner and Senator, let me bring in something else. We were talking about the culture a while ago, the culture that seems to promote these kinds of problems. I don't know if you've noticed that there were some posts supposedly by police officers that went viral today as well. Let me read you one of the posts. I won't mention the name anymore, but apparently he's a captain, a police captain. Itong sinabi niya sa post niya sa Facebook. Lesson learned, kahit puti na ang buhok o ubanin na tayo, matuto tayong rumispeto sa ating mga kapulisan. Mahirap kalaban ang pagtitimpi at pagpapasensya. So, and I've seen more than one post like this from police officers, which does raise a question, what do policemen think of their jobs and think of the people that they are supposed to be protecting?
Yung problema niyan talaga yung this mindset of us versus them. That, the people, yung na-encuentro mo, kalaban mo. The point here is that, okay, when you're talking about criminal organizations, talagang you cannot be namby-pamby. You cannot throw powder puff punches. And you have to meet force with force also. But the more important thing that we have really missed is the requirement that the police be part of the community and immerse himself in the community and must understand the community and works within that particular organization. The police work to prevent crime is a lot more social welfare than military or than violence and force. We know that, but wala hindi kasama sa kultura yan eh. It's the macho concept na I'm the authority, you follow. Hindi pwedeng ganun eh.
Mhm.
No, but
Okay.
just going back to sorry, I don't know, just going back to and final question na rin to kay Commissioner Dumpit. I know you have to go quickly, but where should that start? Where should that change in culture begin? And this is a culture that's obviously very, very deeply rooted and goes back a long, long time. Where should that intervention start?
Well, it has to begin with the institution itself, no? That's number one. You have to reflect. That's why I said beyond condemnation, you have to reflect. There has to be proper reflection. There has to be a re-evaluation. Trace your steps back and use this particular case and other cases. No, just to be able to also say to Senator Orly, that's exactly what we were trying to do with the PNP Human Rights Affairs Office many years ago. And it's all about community-based policing.
Yeah.
That's the idea behind community-based policing. Because the police is really part of the community. Hindi siya yung siga sa kanto, no? Siya yung nag-broker ng peace, hindi siya yung nagsisimula ng gulo. And this is something that we need to change really the mindset of our own police officers so that the people will follow suit. Kasi yan, sinusumbungan ng pulis eh. Hindi ang pulis ang sinusumbong kung kanino. Yun ang kailangan nating isipin, no? Again, it's really a culture. We have to acknowledge that and we have to reflect so that we can properly make the changes that we need to impose so that this kind of violence will stop. But again, my message is all killings, all violence has to be condemned. Hindi tayo namimili kung sino. A killing is a killing.
Pero meron isa pang pwedeng dapat tutukan din eh. There should be a very, an honest to goodness, mental health program in the Philippine National Police. We should be able, kasi stress work din yung yung police talagang isipin mo, hindi rin ganun kadali yan. When you leave your home, you don't know whether you're coming back or in a box already, etc. And there are a lot of stresses. So that should be a major project and a linchpin actually in being able to manage the human resources of the police.
Okay, we'd like to thank CHR Commissioner Karen Dumpit for joining us tonight. Tapos, Senator Early, if you can still stay with us until after the gap, we'd like to have you po with us pa rin. So, please stay with us. We will be back after this break. Thank you, Commissioner.
Welcome back, the Chiefs. We're still with former National Defense Secretary Orly Mercado, and among other things, among the many hats, former Senator Mercado also wears. He also is now on a volunteer basis, serving an advisory role as well to the NAPOL Comm Committee on Crime Prevention and Criminal Justice. Senator,
Yeah.
still here with us.
Yes.
Okay, just very, very quickly, and then we have another guest from the PNP coming in. But kanina si Commissioner Dumpit was talking about culture impunity foremost among them. But she talked about the need to have a bottom-up approach, I mean, or at least to involve the community-based policing. She said, but I do also want to open up the topic about what about the role of the top? The influence of the top on our culture. Again, in all fairness, this problem of impunity and this militaristic mentality, as you said, in the police, this predates all recent administrations, but this current administration in particular. People are saying, look, wag na tayong patumpik-tumpik the words of President Duterte when he tells the police na wag kayong mag-alala, di ba? Kung barilin nyo kung may problema, then he throws in perfunctorily, basta sumusunod tayo sa batas, ha? I mean, in fair, di ba? He throws that in. But let's face it, the public sees this as a perfunctory line that he throws in, and their bigger concern is the body language and the explicit words of the president feeding into this very dangerous culture of impunity.
Yeah, it's really one of the most difficult challenges is changing the culture. And that's asking people to change the way they think. But alala ko yung Camden, New Jersey in 2010, it was a corrupt police department, crime was soaring, etc. The city decided to disband the police department. It was disbanded. And they created a new one, a new department. You know what the emphasis was? A new police department that had an emphasis on community policing and building trust in the community. That was the first assignment that they gave themselves. And they went into social welfare programs, etc. So by example, they showed that they were part of the community. Kasi noong una, puro ang principle na sinusunod natin, yung broken window ni Wilson. If you see a broken window, all you do is, you have to fix it, etc. It's always fixing what is broken, etc. Pero you're waiting for things to be broken. You are not building relationships in the community, and this is maybe something that we have to really focus on. And then the other thing that was being mentioned by Ed and Robbie is the oversight. The civilian oversight is very important in the police department. That's why when I was invited recently to join this committee, I said, okay, I'll go there. But my views are not necessarily, you'll hear from me what I believe in. And I've taken that opportunity because if I have time, why not? If they're going to listen to me, fine. If not, well, what can I do?
Sir, to Robbie's point, sir. To Robbie's point, sir. Let me put it bluntly lang. To Robbie's point, do the president's words directed to the police over the last 4 years, with regard to the war on drugs, with regard to kill, do these aggravate what we see as a possible problematic culture in the police force?
I would believe so, because the point there is that he's emphasizing. Well, I agree with him. He's emphasizing the seriousness of the problem that we face with drugs, and the system is broken, and people agree. The criminal justice system, the 5 pillars of the criminal justice system, are all riddled with holes, etc. They're not strong. Then people will look for shortcuts, and that's the reason why they elect in the world today. There is strong leaders get elected when they promise, I'll solve the problem, and it may not be politically correct, but it will solve the problem. Unfortunately, when you have a long-term view of the issue, it creates more problems than it solves. So,
Okay, with that, yeah, with that, Senator, let me bring in the spokesperson of the Philippine National Police, General Ildebrandi Usana. General, welcome po to the Chiefs.
Yes, sir. Good evening po, sir.
Hi, sir.
General, let's start with, we've been talking about this, we dove headlong into this, but we knew you would come on, so we'll give you the opportunity first to brief us on this particular case of Officer Nuesca. We know he's turned himself in, but what are the updates that you can give us with regards to Officer Nuesca?
Well, the case has already been submitted to the prosecutor, and the prosecutor in turn filed information in court with no bail recommended. And eventually, we are awaiting that the commitment order be issued by the court for him to be transferred to the Pmp control. Insofar as the administrative case concerned, the Internal Affairs Service has already taken action on this regard. The GPNP has instructed them to facilitate the disposition of the case until eventually this reaches the office of the GPNP for his approval, which will lead to the dismissal of the police officers, sir.
Okay. Sir, let me just go back to a point that we started off on kanina discussing, and we want the thoughts of the PNP on this, but one of the things that was clear to people immediately as they started seeing the videos, they started reading up on the background. The background was fairly easy to get, and among other things that people, that yung mga kababayan natin, nalaman nila, dami palang kaso to. 2 homicide cases, a lot of disciplinary cases, refusing to take a drug test, and so on. And ang tanong ng mga tao is, bakit pulis pa yan? And kung pulis man yan, and naipalampas man yung mga cases, paano po nangyayari yung ganito na obviously red flag na yun, di ba? Paano po humantong sa ganito na nandiyan pa rin si Nuesca, dala niya pa rin ang baril niya, ito na nga po, nangyari na nga po itong trahedya na to.
Well, we assume that insofar as the processes associated with all these administrative cases are concerned, it had passed through the rigors of the procedures, and we give it perhaps to Nuesca for having perhaps presented the cases or the evidence in his favor. Thus, the dismissal of 4 out of the 6 cases filed against him. The other 2 actually made him sort of comply with the suspension orders. One of them actually was refusing to take drug tests. And true enough, this is the basis of our maybe a study. Why is it that the likes of Nuesca still stays? Because it is something that borders on the discipline of our police officers. And just in case if we found out that indeed there are some administrative lapses on the part of the investigators to comply with the procedures as well as the substantive part of finding the truth, then we'll see to it that subsequently charges may also be filed against those responsible for the investigation of these previous cases.
Sir, I suppose yung tanong ng marami tao kasi meron bang mekanismo yung PNP para i-regular na i-evaluate or i-assess yung kakayahan ng isang pulis na ipagpatuloy yung kanyang trabaho na may baril. I suppose that's a question that zeroes in on the case of Nuesca. Na after so many cases, some of these cases nga na parusahan siya, ibig sabihin found guilty siya. Some of these cases were left in the air or were cleared. Pero still, di ba, in the end, you're looking at somebody with a very, very colorful history. So ang tanong nga po ng marami, may sistema ba, may mekanismo ba yung PNP para regular na review ang kakayahan ng isang pulis at yung kanyang pagiging responsable pag may hawak na baril?
In hindsight, sir, that probably could have been done if indeed that erring police officer like Nuesca had committed a wrongful act, that all of a sudden he will have to submit himself to such disciplinary measure by removing his firearm from his control. But because these were all overtaken by events, and this eventually led to the tragic case involving him
Yes, sir.
again, Then
Sir,
eventually,
yes, sir. Sir, if I may, sir, para po hindi ko kayo na, para diretso na po tayo dun sa tanong ko. Ibig ko po sabihin meron ho bang sistema at present kung saan may re-evaluation ang lahat ng mga pulis sa kanilang, I don't know, neuropsycho capacity? Meron bang ganon? O dun lang sa kanilang pag-a-apply sa pagkapulisya?
meron naman po actually, sir, mga series of NP examinations. But that
Sa
is dependent
entrance?
from the time he enters the service up to a police officer taking up perhaps a promotional examination. He has also to take up this NP exam. And then he will also have to be required to undergo another NP exam if he applies for transfer or even schooling. So all these are being conducted by our health professionals. But insofar as the mental health dimension is concerned, we only do some kind of stress management and counseling. But that, of course, can only be handled by a number of our health professionals. We can only do so much, in other words. But as far as the other kind of interventions that the PNP could do, maybe the chief of police could also look into how their personnel are being handled in terms of their behavior while they are in the field. Sergeant Huesca actually belongs to the crime laboratory. We just didn't know what has happened all this time when he was facing all these cases, whether there were interventions done, including medically, including all other measures, how to make him fulfill or perhaps comply with the requirements of his commanders. But that will now be made subject of our further investigation insofar as this case is concerned.
Sir, so para lang po malinaw, sinasabi po ninyo, may regular po na neuropsychiatric exam ang lahat ng pulis kada promotion, kada transfer at kada schooling, tama ho ba?
That's right, sir. That's right.
Okay. Okay.
Sige po, muna.
Okay. General, if you don't mind, I just like yung response niyo po. Marami po akong binomonitor sa social media, nakikita natin. Kita niyo naman talagang nagulantang ang mga kababayan natin. Talagang galit na galit yung taong bayan. And kasama sa mga pinag-uusapan nila, sabi nila, sa isang banda, naintindihan natin kung sabihin natin isolated yan. Na gaya nga po na sabi ng Malacanang, isang bugok lang yan, hindi naman ibig sabihin lahat ng kapulisan. At agree po tayo dyan, hindi naman natin dinalahat. Pero yung sinasabi nga ng mga tao, pero hindi rin kami maniniwalang ito lang. In fact, mas pupusta ang ating mga kababayan na maraming mga ganitong bagay na nakakalampas, na hindi nakakasuhan, hindi na pupunta all the way to a criminal prosecution, not even to administrative sanctions. Today, people are confident that there will be justice. Malaki ang chance na may hustisya dito. In fact, sumurrender na si Huesca. Pero, ang pinagbabatayan ng pagkakampante ng ating mga kababayan, and this is where I want your thoughts, is kasi may camera nahuli sa video. Parang si Kian de los Santos, maraming inaangal na EJK, pero the police keep saying, hindi, kay Kian de los Santos, naparusahan naman yung police. But people say, pero kasi may video in that case. And in this case, people are also hanging their hopes on the fact na may video, rather than on the internal systems and the self-policing of the police. Your reaction to this, sir, what would you say to people who are very skeptical that without any video, there will be justice in cases like this?
Sir, if only we could wish lahat po ng any wrongful act ng police officer natin makover ng video para malaman din natin kung between the good guys and the bad guys, how much percentage really of our police officers really do commit acts that are inimical to the service. Actually, ito pong nangyari kay Huesca, hindi naman po ito naka-apekto talaga sa PNP. We just have to perform our duties in accordance with the rule of law. We are a human rights protector. Marami po kami naging contribution sa pagsisilbi sa bayan. We also have our share of deaths among police officers na nagsilbi at nagbuwis sa kanilang buhay. At siguro hindi naman ito masasabi na dahilan para baguhin namin ang organization dahil lang kay Nuesca. Siguro maintindihan din naman po natin na marami po tayong mga efforts, programs, services. Yung iba po dyan, katulong na rin po natin na spiritual priest, mga iba pang mga organizations. Kahit ang CHR, nakatulong na po namin yan. Nagkaroon po kami ng series of seminars as regards conduct of human rights and all. All these elements have been put into place. We just have to look at the organizations that are very dynamic. We are dealing with the best and the worst of people. And as such, kailangan po natin i-adjust in accordance with what we expect the people, our people, insofar as the PNP is concerned. Ang nakikita lang po namin dyan, this will not deter us. This will not even discourage us from performing our duties. Nuesca is not the Philippine National Police po. We understand marami pong mga naging contribution, insofar as yung mga comments and all coming from the social media netizens, and also some experts would tell us ganito ang gawin natin. Okay lang po yun. We accommodate all this, but for us to even change the entire organization because of Nuesca, siguro that will also be unfair to those many more other police officers who are doing their level best to serve and protect our people po.
Yes, sir. Well, I think, sir, we agree naman that Nuesca is not the police. That is why we are asking about mechanisms and processes po para we can zero in on the problem Kagaya po nga sabi niyo, mukhang marami namang neuropsychiatric tests na binibigay sa mga police as they progress up the ranks. Pero in this case po, staff sergeant na po si Nuesca and mukhang hindi niya kaya yung pressure ng simpleng away kapitbahay. Paano kung nakalusot ang kaso niya dun sa mga lahat ng neuropsychiatric exams na nakuha niya, coming from whether it's entrance exam, going up from PO1, PO2, PO3, and up the line?
We'll check that out, sir, because as far as the life story of Nuesca, we just didn't know whether his relationship with the neighborhood, specifically that neighbor of theirs that he had dealt with, that resulted in the tragic incident. We just have to really look at this as a lesson learned insofar as the behavior of our police officers. We can still consider him as the basis whether our police officers have been replete with history of cases, whether he still deserves to be given firearms while in the performance of his duty, or he must be just relegated to performing administrative work, or immediately after the first instance where he is facing a case, he will have to face right away the dismissal, regardless of the evidence that may be presented. At the end of the day, we just still have to comply with the rule of law, with the procedures. Well, of course, we just regret the fact that after 6 cases, he's still with the Philippine National Police. But rest assured, sir, that Nuesca will just be one of the many of the things that we probably may address, but that doesn't mean that the PNP will have to change in its entirety because of this particular incident. We are more focused on maybe rebuilding further what Senator Mercado was telling all along, community-based policing, because this is something that we have to really strengthen on in terms of our relationship with the community. We just have to maintain the kind of discipline, because as far as the police organization is concerned, it has to be the most disciplined among all the organizations around the world, because it has been vested with one power, and that is the power of the gun. We hope that our police officers may be able to appreciate why is it that they have been given this authority to carry firearms.
Maybe we
and that's really something that, actually, kinabanggit nyo nga po, you also work with the CHR. We do have to say that's one of the things that you both mentioned, the need to instill that value for the policemen being part of the community and addressing this from the bottom up, which just to raise the same question that we were raising with CHR and with Senator Orly, how do you square that? Yung the need to be the most disciplined agency in the country with the mixed signals that we're getting from the top leadership, from President Duterte. Gaya nga po ng nabanggit kanina ni Senator Orly, on the one hand, naiintindihan natin yung to send that urgent message na may kailangan, but it's a short-term thing. In the meantime, what are the long-term implications of the words of and the directions of the leadership na okay mag-alala, walang makukulong na police, and so on. Shoot first, we'll ask questions later. Basta you do as you're told, wag kayo mag-alala. And you know what we're talking about. People have expressed concern from day one. Now, what will that put into the minds of our police? You talk about the need to discipline and to remind ourselves that the discipline must come from within us. In the meantime, from above and from around us, we're getting the message na, hindi, wag niyo isipin yan, mission first, alahanin natin. And so on. How do you reconcile these two things? And would you acknowledge that these are mixed signals?
Well, police officers are public servants. We are here to serve and protect the people. And it's not necessary that we have to listen to what all our leaders are saying just for us to be good police officers. What we ought to perform really is our mandate in the institution. That for us to be able to give flesh to this, we just have to carry out our duties and responsibilities based on what we have learned from training. Of course, when it comes to the development of our police officers, we are dealing with the dynamic of our society that even police officers are being called now to respond to very minute details of any particular situation. Kahit po siguro sabihin natin, hindi problema ng police, binabato na rin sa ating police organization. And that created, of course, the mixture of personalities among our police officers. Hindi po natin makita kung saan talaga tayo. Pero nandito pa rin kami, ready, willing, and able to serve and protect our people, no matter what the cost. As far as yung leadership framework po natin, sa amin naman po, so long as our leaders are already telling us what needs to be done, we just follow the rule of law, and then comply with the procedures, and then be transparent in what we are doing. I guess there's nothing wrong kung meron man po tayong mga kailangan marinig pa. Kasi at the end of the day, it's what the rules that are telling us that we need to comply with. Of course, hindi po natin ma-ensure yung perfection ng aming organization. Marami talagang mga flaws, mga wrongful provisions. But we hope that we come to terms with what the people are expecting in us to perform. And kung ano man po yung mga kailangan pa namin gawin base sa kanilang expectation, ginagawa naman po namin, hindi lang siguro talaga mag-perfect. And yung mga full acts naman po, we're talking about 221,000 police officers. And based on the existing data, we only have about 16,000 police officers who have been meted with corresponding penalties administratively. And almost 5,000 of these were dismissed from the service. That means they actually have not gone back to the organization, except for those who would claim that they have gone through the processes of having to provide also evidence in their favor, and then we give it to them. What we need to really accomplish here is to engage the community more than ever, because police work is to a large extent community work. We just have to really fulfill our duty more in the
Pwede ba ako sumingin general lang?
Senator Early.
I think one of the things that you can do is start an honest-to-goodness re-evaluation of your psychological measures, tests, whatever it is, or your management of your mechanisms by which you certify people under the policemen to be competent to do their job. Kasi it could be flawed. It's a preventive mechanism. Instead of waiting for things to happen, we should be able to come up with better tests and better ways by which we can prevent the deterioration in the behavior of certain men in the police organization.
Yes,
General,
sir.
if I can follow up yung tanong ni Senator Orly, to that effect din kasi, gaano ho ba kahirap yung yung psychological, yung neuropsychiatric exams na binibigay sa ating mga kapulisan? Or is it just a formality? Is it just perfunctory? Alam mo ibig sabihin, parang sa LTO, yung medical exam sa LTO, parang parang bayad lang tapos na. Ganun ho ba? I mean, it's a serious question po kasi syempre in the end we're talking about people who bring the guns.
If I were to consider my own experiences doing the MP examination, mahirap po talaga. It's quite difficult. And for you to pass it, kailangan enough yung psychology, enough yung faculty of your mind para masagot mo yung mga issues and then the preparations with regard to the MP examination. Well, of course, the health professionals would also claim that they have been relatively successful at finding out who deserves to get to the Philippine National Police. But in between, maybe what we probably may need to improve on is the kind of intervention necessary at every moment police officers are engaged into certain operations. And we do not have that because we don't have enough professionals to handle this kind of intervention. What we do is the simple stress management. We allow some kind of counseling as well. But this is not something that is done regularly. It's only on a case-to-case basis. Maybe in the previous instances, say for example, the Quirino Grandstand, where some police officer got involved there, went through the requirements of post-traumatic stress disorder interventions. And we hope that all these things will be made as part of the regular activities of the Philippine National Police. Meanwhile, we have the internal cleansing as well. We are actually not threatening but warning our police officers if they do not toe the line, if they are not compliant with the rule of law, then they will eventually be booted out from the organization. Under no circumstances are we going to allow any bad eggs to stay longer in the organization than they are expected to.
General, if you don't mind, we know we're running out of time, but I just want to seize upon it because we'd like to thank you. You gave us a piece of data. Kanina lang sinasabi namin, it's so hard to get data out of the PNP. But para lang ma-contextualize din ng ating mga kababayan, your efforts to clean ranks. Kanina you mentioned 16,000 ang na-disiplina, 5,000 were actually dismissed. That's on a base of around 210,000 police. Tama po ba yung pagkakadinig natin?
Yes, sir. That's right. More than...
Now, just one more piece of data that I'd like to ask. Of the 16,000 na nadisiplina, ilan po yung kaso na naisampa? Whether or not that was, in total, ilang kaso po yung naisampa?
Administrative case po ito, 16,839 in all. This was from 2016 to 2020. So it's a 4-year period. And we have a number of the disposition, of these cases ranges from dismissal from the service to demotion down to the withholding.
I see. Okay, so 16,000 is the total number of cases nung ano.
That's right, sir.
Okay, maraming salamat po.
Okay, General Ildebrandi Usana, maraming salamat po for joining us tonight.
Thank you, General.
Maraming salamat po.
Senator Orly, if I can squeeze in one more question, kayo naman po, ano yung rekomendasyon ninyo? Of course, we talked about the need to improve, to work on the culture in the PNP and all that. Pero mechanisms-wise, procedure-wise, institutional-wise, what do we need to put in place immediately?
You know, I've always said, in general terms, that one of the things that we should do is follow the constitutional mandate that you should have a national police force, civilian in character. And I think it has moved to morph into a more military organization. Truth to tell, even in the context of crime prevention, we all know the best way to prevent crime: police visibility. But our policemen, the whole day, for example, how many policemen did you see in the streets? The only time you see policemen is when there are VIPs or they're on parade, for example, in Camp Crame. I think we should rethink very carefully how it is structured, because I think this is one of the problems of how it is structured. Remember that the National Police came from the Integrated National Police.
Mhm.
This before was the Philippine Constabulary,
Mhm.
and it was a service of the armed forces of the Philippines. And you will see now they've even moved back to military titles, etc. And kanina binabanggit ko rin if you have too much militarization in the police force, they mimic tactics, etc., and they require weapons that may not be that may be too lethal and may not be appropriate for their functions. So
And perhaps
actually,
attitudes.
Kaya sa akin, for the problems, I think there should be a strong emphasis instead of getting more lethal weapons, is go to the non-lethal weapons as a means by which you can condition, para hindi yung puro bunot ng baril lang, nagalit lang, nagpanting ang tenga mo, bunutin mo ang baril mo, and you know, you learn how to shoot, you know, that's this, and what we see now on the screen is unfortunately a consequence of this.
Okay. Robbie, any more?
Wala na.
Okay.
Maraming salamat po.
Pinapalis na tayo. Overtime na tayo.
Takot ako kay Joby. Okay. Maraming salamat po, Senator Orly Mercado.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Oh, Bob, overtime tayo. We have to go. So that's it for this Monday edition of the Chiefs. We hope to discuss it. We'll keep the conversation going. I'm Ed Lingao.
I'm Robbie Alampay, and we are One News.